He had everything a woman could want, and that's exactly why none of them could stay. Robert was the man everyone looked at, but no one touched, not for lack of interest, but because his body hid a brutal truth. His exaggerated masculinity turned every attempt at intimacy into unbearable pain. Rumors spread through the streets of Portland like wildfire, and what should have been power became a prison, until Chloe came back, the only woman the world had also judged as too much. And when two rejected bodies found each other again, everything changed. If this story has already touched something inside you, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the super thanks button. Comment where you're listening from. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing stories that truly move people. The smell of fresh cedar and varnish filled the air of Robert's workshop every morning, a scent that clung to his clothes, his skin, his calloused hands. In the heart of Portland's Pearl District, where brick buildings wore murals like Second Skin and coffee shops buzzed with conversations of artists and dreamers, Robert carved out his life from wood. His workshop was tucked between a vintage record store and a yoga studio, a place where sawdust danced in beams of golden light, and the rumble of his circular saw became the neighborhood's unlikely lullaby. He was 32, built like the Douglas firs that rose in the forests on the city's outskirts. Broad shoulders that strained against flannel shirts, arms marked by muscles formed from years of hoisting heavy planks, hands that could shape oak as easily as they held a coffee cup. His dark brown hair fell slightly over his forehead, and his eyes, deep brown, warm as whiskey, carried a kindness that contradicted his size. Women noticed him. God, how they noticed him. At the Saturday farmers market, where he sold handcrafted cutting boards and wooden spoons, their eyes followed the movement of his hands as he glided his palm over the smooth grain of walnut. At the corner bar, where he drank craft beer after long days, conversations paused when he walked in, and whispers fluttered like moths toward a flame. He had the kind of smile that reached his eyes first, crinkling the corners before his lips even moved, a smile that promised safety, tenderness, understanding. But Robert carried a secret that turned that promise into a lie he never meant to tell. They'd started with Jessica, a graphic designer with ink-stained fingers and a laugh that filled entire rooms. They met at a gallery opening, connected over their shared love of creating things with their own hands. On their third date, when clothes fell away in the low amber light of her bedroom and desire gave way to attempt, her gasp wasn't one of pleasure, it was pain. Sharp, immediate, unbearable. She tried, he tried, slow, careful, apologizing with every movement, but her body couldn't accommodate what is offered, and the night ended with her curled away from him, silent tears dampening the pillow as he dressed in shame. "It's not you," she whispered, but her eyes said otherwise. Then came Maria, a barista who drew hearts in coffee foam and slipped her number across the counter with a knowing smile. Same story, different ending. This time, the pain came with a cry that made him pull back immediately, his heart hammering with guilt. She was kind about it, heartbreakingly kind, but he saw the disappointment cloud her features, the way her hand trembled as she reached for her clothes. News travels fast in tight-knit neighborhoods, especially when it comes wrapped in the strange currency of male mythology. What started as hushed conversations between friends morphed into whispered legends at wine bars and book clubs. Robert became a cautionary tale, a biological curiosity, a man whose very masculinity had become a weapon he never wanted to wield. "Did you hear about the carpenter on Gleason? The one with the hands?" "No, the one with, you know." The whole neighborhood seemed to know, and with knowledge came isolation. Robert started avoiding social events. The block parties that once filled him with joy now felt like minefields of curious glances and pitying smiles. He felt the weight of eyes on him when he walked down the street. Women who had once flirted now looked away, as if mere proximity might hurt them. His friends, men he'd known since moving to Portland 5 years ago, didn't know how to handle the silent embarrassment. Friday night beers became less frequent. Invitations to barbecues stopped coming. No one knew what to say to a man whose virility, that thing that was supposed to be celebrated, envied, had become his deepest curse. He smiled with his eyes, but carried in his shoulders the pain of never being fully accepted. At night, alone in his apartment above the workshop, Robert wondered if this was how it would always be. He looked at his hands, the same hands that could turn raw wood into art, and wondered why his body couldn't be equally controllable, equally shapeable. Why did he have to be like this? Why had nature given him something the world called too much? He remembered when he was younger, before he understood the burden he carried. There was a girl back then, Chloe, tall, beautiful, with hair that caught sunlight and eyes that truly saw him. They were just kids sharing secrets under the old tree in her backyard, dreaming about futures that seemed so possible, so bright. But that was before everything. Now Robert was a myth, an urban legend. The man women desired from afar but feared up close, and in every stranger's gaze he read a silent sentence: untouchable. Wood didn't judge him. Wood received his hands, his tools, his vision, and transformed into something beautiful. Maybe that's why he spent more and more hours in the workshop, lost in the smell of sawdust and the hypnotic rhythm of sandpaper against grain. There, he had control. There, he could create without fear of causing pain. But at night, when the city's silence settled in and moonlight cast long shadows through the windows of his empty bedroom, Robert felt the weight of loneliness like a stone in his chest. He was desired, he was feared, but never, ever was he simply loved. The months that followed turned Robert into a ghost of himself. He still woke every morning to the alarm at 6, still made his coffee strong and bitter, still opened the workshop doors promptly at 7:30. But something fundamental had changed, something he couldn't name but felt in every fiber of his being. The rumors had taken on a life of their own, like a creature with its own will that fed on whispers and furtive glances. At breakfast at Stumptown Coffee, where he used to grab his double espresso before work, conversation ceased when he entered. Not abruptly, that would be too obvious, but gradually, like music fading down until it became just a distant murmur. "That's him," he'd hear sometimes when he pretended not to pay attention. "The carpenter." One Thursday afternoon, as he loaded oak planks from his truck, he heard two women talking across the street. They didn't know he could hear them, or maybe they didn't care. "My cousin went out with him," said one, her voice carrying that morbid curiosity people reserve for other people's tragedies. "She said it was impossible, literally impossible." "I heard some girl ended up in the hospital," the other replied, and Robert felt his stomach turn. That wasn't true. None of it was true, but the truth mattered less than the story, and the story had become something monstrous. The Pearl District, which had once felt like a welcoming community full of artists, dreamers, and creative souls, now seemed like a silent courtroom where he was judged on every corner. Women who used to smile when he passed now looked away. Some looked at him with something that seemed like pity, a pity that burned more than any insult could. And the men were worse in their own way. His friends, or those he had considered friends, began pulling away like the low tide. Mike, who played basketball with him every Sunday at the park, started making excuses. "I'm busy, man. Maybe next week." Next week never came. James, his occasional beer buddy, who laughed loud and told bad jokes and made life feel lighter, simply stopped responding to messages. The group chat conversations continued. Robert could see the notifications, but when he typed something, the silence that followed was deafening. One night he decided to show up unannounced at the bar where they used to meet. The group was there, 5 men he'd called brothers, beer sweating in their hands, laughter filling the smoky air. When Robert approached the table, the laughter died. "Hey guys," he said, trying to sound casual, but his voice betrayed uncertainty. "Robert," Mike nodded, but didn't invite him to sit. "Everything okay?" He tried again. Yeah, just, talking about stuff." James couldn't meet his eyes. The silence stretched like taffy, sticky and uncomfortable. Robert stood there for another moment, a moment too long, before nodding and walking away. No one called him back. He left the bar and walked through Portland's wet streets, the fine October rain trickling down his neck, mixing with something warm he refused to recognize as tears. Neon signs reflected in puddles, splotches of pink and blue that shimmered beneath his feet. How had things come to this? How had something so private, so intimate become public knowledge? He never talked about it, never. The women talked, and then their friends talked, and then their friends' friends. Until the story was no longer about Robert, the man. It was about Robert, the myth. Robert the impossible. Robert the untouchable. In every stranger's gaze, he read a silent sentence. Untouchable. The workshop became both his sanctuary and his prison. He arrived earlier, left later. The sawdust in his lungs felt cleaner than the air outside, heavy with judgment. His hands, those hands that caused so much trouble when they touched skin, were perfect when they touched wood. He created a walnut dining table with marquetry details so intricate they looked like lace. He spent 60 hours on it, every minute an escape. When he finally finished it, polished until it gleamed like dark glass, he stood staring and wondered who would sit around it. What family would laugh and eat and live around this beautiful thing he'd made? Not his, never his. A customer came to pick it up on Tuesday. A woman in her 40s with a warm smile and kind eyes. "It's gorgeous," she sighed, running her fingers over the top. "You have magic hands." Robert froze. Magic hands. He'd heard that before, but now the words carried a different weight, a cruel irony. "Thanks," he managed to say. She paid, thanked him again, and left with the movers she'd hired. The workshop went empty again, echoing with silence. That night, Robert sat on the floor of his workshop, back against the wall, a half-empty bottle of bourbon beside him. Moonlight came through the skylight, casting long bluish shadows over the hanging tools. Saws, planes, chisels, each in its place, each with a purpose. He wondered what his purpose was. To be admired from afar? To be desired but never touched? To be feared for something he didn't choose, didn't ask for, couldn't change? He thought of Chloe again, as he always did on the darkest nights. Chloe, who looked at him like he was just him. Not too much, not too little. Just Robert. She'd left so long ago, taken by her family to another state, and he'd never tried to find her. What would he say? "Hey, remember me? I'm that guy everyone can't stop talking about for all the wrong reasons." The man of strong wood and sensitive soul slowly faded until he hid completely. He drank straight from the bottle, the liquid burning his throat, and closed his eyes. In the dark, he could pretend he was someone else. Someone normal. Someone who could walk into a bar without awkward silences. Someone who could touch another person without causing pain. Someone who wasn't so completely, devastatingly alone. But when he opened his eyes, reality was still there. The tools, the sawdust, the emptiness, and the whispers. Always the whispers. Memories have a smell. Robert discovered this years ago, when the scent of cinnamon and apple instantly transported him back to his grandmother's kitchen, his 8-year-old self, small hands buried in pie dough. And there was another smell that haunted him on sleepless nights, cut grass, ripe strawberries, and something floral he could never identify. The smell of summers with Chloe. She appeared in his thoughts like a breath of relief, a cool breeze on a stifling day. Especially now, when the weight of loneliness pressed on his chest like water filling lungs. On the hardest nights, when bourbon wasn't enough to silence the whispers echoing in his mind, he allowed himself to remember. They were 10 when they met. Chloe's family had just moved in next door, and Robert was in the backyard trying to build a fort out of cardboard boxes, an ambitious engineering project that kept collapsing. He heard the voice before he saw her. "You're doing it wrong. You need an internal structure." Robert looked up and his jaw dropped. The girl standing at the fence was tall. Not just tall for a 10-year-old girl, really tall. She towered over him by at least 6 inches, maybe more. Her honey-brown hair was pulled back in 2 messy braids, and her green eyes sparkled with sharp intelligence. "I know how to build a fort," he'd replied, defensive in the way only 10-year-olds can be. "Clearly not," she smiled, and there was something in that smile, no meanness, just honesty, that made Robert laugh. She jumped the fence with athletic ease, and within half an hour, they had the most amazing fort in the neighborhood, complete with a roof and windows. They sat inside, knees bent, and shared a box of cookies Chloe had brought. "I'm Chloe," she said, extending her hand with comic formality. "Robert," he replied, shaking it, and so it began. They were the playground outcasts, she for being too tall, he for being too quiet. While other kids played soccer and jumped rope, Robert and Chloe built worlds. They turned the old tree in her backyard into a pirate ship, a castle, a space station. They spent hours up there, legs dangling from branches, inventing stories where they were heroes and no one judged them. "My mum says I'll stop growing soon," Chloe said one day when she was 12 and already 5'7". Her voice carried a fragile hope that broke Robert's heart. "Why? You're perfect like this," he'd replied with the brutal honesty of youth. She looked at him, surprised, and then smiled. That smile that made Robert's world make sense. But she didn't stop growing. At 15, Chloe was 6 feet tall, all legs and adolescent awkwardness. Boys at school made jokes. Girls whispered. She started walking hunched over, trying to shrink, trying to disappear. "Hold your head up," Robert would say whenever he saw her like that. He'd grown too. At 15, he already had broad shoulders and large hands that promised the height yet to come. "You're like a tree, Chloe. The tallest ones are always the most beautiful." To him, Chloe wasn't tall. She was made to measure for his eyes. They were 16 when everything changed. It was summer, the air thick with the smell of roses from Chloe's mother's garden. They were lying on the grass under their tree, watching clouds pass, a ritual they'd kept since childhood. "I'm moving," Chloe said suddenly, her voice flat, as if trying not to feel the words. Robert's head snapped around. "What?" "My dad got a job in Seattle. We're leaving at the end of the month." Robert's world tilted. Seattle, that was far, really far. "But you can't," he said, and hated how his voice sounded young, scared. "I don't have a choice, Robert." She looked at him, and her green eyes were shining with unshed tears. "I don't want to go." They fell silent. The sound of crickets was starting to rise, filling the air with their night song. Strawberries and flowers, he could smell her perfume, mixed with the grass. He wanted to say so many things, wanted to say she was the only person who made him feel like he belonged somewhere. Wanted to say that when he looked at her, he saw future, not the vague future teenagers dream about, but something concrete, real, possible. But he was 16 and the words stuck in his throat like stones. On the day she left, he went to her house. Most of the boxes were already in the moving truck. Chloe was in the backyard staring at the tree with an expression Robert would never forget, longing for something she hadn't left yet. "Hey," he said softly. She turned, and he saw she was crying. Without thinking, he opened his arms and she walked into them, all of her height, all of her length, fitting perfectly against him. He'd grown more. Now he was taller, but just enough. Enough so her chin could rest on his shoulder, so his arms could wrap around her completely. "Will you write to me?" she whispered against his neck, and he felt the wetness of her tears on his skin. "Every day," he promised. They stayed like that for a long time, long enough for Chloe's mother to have to call her twice. When they finally separated, Chloe held his face between her hands. "You're my favorite person in the whole world," she said. "You know that, right?" He nodded, not trusting his voice. And then she was gone. They wrote for a few months. Long emails full of details about their separate lives. But life has a way of intruding. High school ended, college started. Emails got shorter, more spaced out, until eventually they stopped completely. But Robert never forgot. He couldn't, because Chloe was proof that at least once someone had seen him, really seen him, and hadn't found him too much or too little. Now, sitting on the floor of his empty workshop, bourbon burning in his stomach, Robert wondered where she was, what she was doing, if she still thought about him. If she'd found someone who saw her the way he always had, not as too tall but as exactly right. He closed his eyes and could see her clearly, 15 years old, all legs and shy smiles, saying she was too tall, as if it were a flaw. "You're perfect," he'd said, and he'd really believed it. He still did. There's a specific kind of pain that comes from losing someone who's still alive, an emotional amputation where the phantom limb keeps aching years later. Robert knew this pain intimately. It lived in his chest, just below his ribs, a constant weight he'd learned to carry as part of himself. That last afternoon with Chloe remained preserved in his memory, with cruel clarity, every detail sharp as broken glass, every moment capable of cutting if he touched it wrong. It was August, the kind of day when summer heat began giving way to the promise of fall. The sky was that deep, impossible blue that only exists at summer's end, and the leaves of the old tree in Chloe's backyard whispered with a breeze that smelled like change. Robert had spent the entire morning trying to find the right words. He practiced speeches in the bathroom mirror, wrote and tore up 3 different letters, rehearsed declarations while pretending to organize his room. But now, standing in front of her house, seeing the moving truck almost completely loaded, all those carefully chosen words evaporated like dew under the sun. Chloe's mother was on the porch, packing the last items into cardboard boxes. She saw Robert and smiled, a sad smile that said she understood somehow what was happening in his heart. "She's out back, honey," she said softly. "In the tree." Of course she was. Where else would she be? Robert walked around the house, his Converse sneakers sinking slightly into the grass, still damp with morning dew. And there she was, Chloe, sitting on the thickest branch of the old tree, legs swinging in the air, staring at the horizon as if she could see Seattle from there. She wore a yellow summer dress her mother had probably insisted she put on for the trip, but had a hoodie tied around her waist, always practical, always prepared. Her hair was down, falling down her back in honey-brown waves that caught the sunlight. She looked grown up, different from the girl he'd known just a few years ago, but still unmistakably Chloe. "Can I come up?" he asked, stopping at the base of the tree. She looked down and smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. "Like you need to ask." Robert climbed with the ease of years of practice. They'd climbed this tree thousands of times, knew every branch, every knot in the wood, every safe place to put your foot. He sat beside her, and their shoulders touched. Perfect fit, like always. For a long moment, they just sat in silence. The wind moved the leaves above them, creating patterns of light and shadow on their faces. A songbird chirped somewhere nearby. The world kept turning, indifferent to the fact that his was about to fall apart. "Remember when we built that fort up here?" Chloe said finally, her voice thick. "You were so sure the branch would hold all those planks you dragged up from the basement." "It did," Robert replied, forcing lightness into his voice. "For 3 days, then it collapsed and almost broke your brother's arm." "Technical details," she laughed, a small, broken sound, and then the laugh turned into a sob. Robert felt his own chest tighten. "I don't want to go," she whispered. "I told my parents." I begged. "But my dad already signed the contract, we already have a house, they already enrolled my sister in the new school, and I—" Her voice failed. Robert turned to look at her and saw tears streaming down her cheeks. Without thinking, he raised his hand and wiped them away with his thumb. A gesture so intimate, so natural, that neither of them questioned it. "Seattle's not that far," he said, though they both knew it was a lie. It might as well be another planet. "It's too far," she replied, and her voice carried a truth that cut. "We'll talk. Every day. I promise." "Promises change," Chloe said, and there was a wisdom in her words that went beyond her 16 years. "People change. You'll make new friends senior year. You'll meet pretty girls who actually understand football and aren't taller than you." "Hey." Robert held her chin, making her look at him. "Don't do that. Don't make yourself small. Not here. Not with me." Her green eyes searched his, looking for... what? Lies? Pity? But all she found was raw honesty. "You're the most important person in my life," he said, every word heavy with truth. "You know that." "Robert." Her voice was a whisper. "No. Let me finish." He took a deep breath. This was the part he'd rehearsed, the part that mattered. You're like air. I don't notice how much I need it until I imagine being without it. And now you're leaving, and I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to let you go." Chloe closed her eyes and more tears fell. "Then don't." Robert's heart stopped. The world stopped. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "What do you mean?" She opened her eyes and looked at him with an intensity he'd never seen before. "Ask me to stay. Tell me you need me. Give me a reason, and I'll fight my parents. I'll find a way." He should have said something, should have said everything. But he was 16 and terrified, and didn't fully understand what she was offering, what she was asking. Chloe, I can't ask that. Your family. Something changed in her face. A door closing, a light going out. Right, she said, and her voice was different now, more distant. You're right. Chloe? Chloe? Her mother's voice cut through the air. We need to go, honey. We have a long drive. They climbed down from the tree in silence. On the ground, they stood facing each other, and Robert could feel the weight of all the unspoken things hanging between them like fog. Chloe stepped forward and hugged him, tight, desperate. He held her back, memorizing the feel of her in his arms, the smell of strawberries in her hair, the way she fit perfectly against him. You're going to do amazing things, she whispered in his ear. You're going to build beautiful things and make someone very happy. You too, he managed to say, though the words came out strangled. She pulled back, and for a moment, just a moment, their faces were inches apart. His eyes fell to her lips. Hers did the same. The air between them was charged, electric with possibility. But then she stepped back, took one step away, then another. Goodbye, Robert. See you later, he corrected, because goodbye felt too final. She smiled sadly. See you later. He stood there, rooted in place, as she walked to the car. Stood there as the door closed. Stood there as the engine started. And stood there watching as the car pulled out of the driveway, drove down the street, and disappeared around the corner. There was no kiss. Just a deep silence, loaded with everything that was never said. When he finally turned to leave, Robert looked at the tree one last time. It stood there solid and unchanging, silent witness to all their shared summers, all their whispered secrets, all their childhood dreams. She took the light, and he stayed in the shadow. But the tree remembered, and years later, when his life had crumbled into loneliness and cruel whispers, when he sat alone in his workshop with bourbon burning his throat, it was this memory that hurt most. Not because they'd separated, but because he'd never found the courage to say the words that mattered. Stay, please stay, because I love you. But he didn't say it, and she left. And the tree remembered. 5 years after Chloe left, Robert met Amelia at a local art exhibition. She was standing in front of an abstract metal sculpture, her head tilted, lips pursed in concentration. There was something about the way she observed the piece, really observed it, not just looked, that caught his attention. Can you make sense of it? He'd asked, approaching. She turned, and he saw warm brown eyes framed by thick-rimmed glasses. She was petite, maybe 5'3", with short brown hair cut in a practical bob and a smile that lit up her whole face. Honestly, I have no idea, she laughed, but it looks like my life. Complicated, crooked, but somehow still standing. Robert smiled. There was something refreshing about her honesty, how she didn't pretend to understand something just to seem sophisticated. Robert, he said, extending his hand. Amelia, she replied, shaking it with surprising firmness for someone so small. They spent the rest of the evening walking through the gallery together, talking about art, life, work. She was an occupational therapist at a children's hospital, helping kids relearn basic movements after accidents or illnesses. There was a kindness in her, a deep empathy that shone when she talked about her patients. I work with wood, Robert said when she asked, like carpentry. Woodworking. I make custom furniture. Her eyes lit up. That's amazing. Creating something from nothing with your own hands, it must be so rewarding. It was. And it had been so long since someone understood that he wasn't just a man who cut wood, but an artist in his own way. They started seeing each other. Coffee dates first, then dinners. Walks in Forest Park, where trees formed green cathedrals overhead, and the smell of damp earth and pine filled the air. Amelia talked with her hands, animated gestures punctuating every story. She laughed with her whole body, throwing her head back, not caring who was watching. With her, Robert began to feel normal, almost normal. But the ghost of his past haunted him. Every time she casually touched his arm, he felt his stomach tighten. Every time their kiss deepened, he felt panic rising in his throat. She didn't know. How could she know? But he knew that eventually he'd have to tell her. They'd been dating 6 months before she gently suggested that maybe it was time to take the next step. They were at her apartment, red wine in glasses on the coffee table, jazz playing softly. She moved closer, kissed his neck, and whispered, "Stay tonight." Robert's heart raced, not with desire, but with terror. "Amelia, I need to tell you something." She pulled back, studying his face. "Okay, you can tell me anything." He took a deep breath. "I have a condition, physical, that makes intimacy difficult." She waited, no judgment in her eyes, just gentle curiosity. "I'm larger, significantly larger, and it's caused problems, pain, for the women I've tried with." He couldn't look at her as he spoke. He fixed his eyes on his hands, those traitorous hands that were so good with wood and so destructive with flesh. "Look at me," Amelia said softly. He obeyed, expecting to see pity or worse, fear. But what he saw was thought. She was processing, analyzing the way therapists do. "Okay," she said finally. "Thank you for telling me. This changes some things, but it doesn't change how I feel about you." "Amelia, let me finish." She took his hands. "Intimacy isn't just penetration, Robert. There are 1,000 ways to connect with someone, to give and receive pleasure. If this is a challenge we have to navigate, then we'll navigate it, together." Hope bloomed in his chest like a fragile plant. "Are you sure? I work helping people adapt to bodies that don't work the way they want them to. I can apply that same creativity here." She smiled. "Besides, I like you. A lot. I'm not going to let anatomy get in the way of that." They tried. God, how they tried. Amelia researched, consulted colleagues discreetly, bought books on alternative sexuality. They explored touch, oral pleasure, toys, positions, and for a while, a brief and beautiful while, it seemed to work. Robert learned to give pleasure in ways he'd never considered. Amelia was patient, communicative, willing to experiment. But something was missing, something neither of them wanted to admit out loud. She never said anything, but he saw it in her eyes afterward. A small, silent sadness, a hunger not quite satisfied. She loved him, he knew that. But her body wanted something his body couldn't give without causing pain. They got married 2 years later, in a small ceremony in a friend's backyard, under a canopy of fairy lights and wildflowers. Amelia was beautiful in a simple lace dress, and when she said, "I do," there were genuine tears of joy in her eyes. Robert believed in that moment that love would be enough. It wasn't. The first year was good, the second, harder. By the third, the silence between them grew like a living thing, taking up space where there used to be conversation and laughter. They still loved each other. That was the cruelest part. Still cared deeply, still respected each other, still laughed at each other's jokes. But the lack of full physical connection began to create a crack that slowly widened into a chasm. Amelia never complained, never blamed him. But he saw it, in the way she sighed when she thought he wasn't listening, in the way her gaze lingered when she saw couples touching casually, in the way she pulled away slightly when he reached for her in bed. One winter night, 4 years into the marriage, she sat on the couch beside him and took his hand. "Robert," she said softly, and he knew from her tone that something was breaking. "We need to talk." His stomach sank. "Okay. I love you. You know that, right?" "I know. And you're one of the best men I've ever met. Kind, talented, thoughtful. But," tears filled her eyes, "but I can't do this anymore. I tried. God, how I tried. But there's something missing, and it's eating me up inside." He nodded because he knew. Of course he knew. He felt it too. The hole where there should be wholeness, the hunger that no amount of other forms of intimacy could completely fill. "I don't blame you," she continued, her voice breaking. "This isn't your fault. But it's also not my fault for wanting more, for wanting everything. And I feel so selfish saying that." "You're not selfish," Robert said, and he truly believed it. "You deserve everything you want. You deserve someone who can give you that. I don't want someone else, I want you, but you can't have both," he finished for her. She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. Robert pulled her into a hug, and they stayed like that for a long time, crying, holding each other, mourning a marriage that was dying not from lack of love, but from lack of ability. The divorce was amicable, if such a thing exists. They divided assets fairly, kept communication respectful, promised to remain friends. "You'll find someone," Amelia said the day she finished moving her things out. "Someone who fits in all the ways that matter." "You too," he replied, though he didn't believe it for himself. She kissed his cheek, one last gesture of affection, and then she was gone. Robert stood in the empty apartment, surrounded by spaces where her belongings used to be, the half-empty bookshelf, the empty hook in the bathroom where her robe used to hang, the silence where there used to be her laughter. Amelia left. Robert stayed, once again, alone and wounded. Something was missing between them, something the soul asked for and the body couldn't give. And in the growing darkness of that winter afternoon, Robert wondered if it would always be like this, loved halfway, desired but never fully accepted, condemned to live at the intersection between desire and impossibility. Wood never rejected him. Wood always responded to his hands. Maybe he thought that was all he deserved. The winter after the divorce was the darkest Robert had ever lived through, not just in the metaphorical sense, though it certainly was that, but literally. Portland plunged into weeks of relentless rain, the kind of rain that turned the world into shades of grey and made the sun seem like a forgotten myth. Robert stopped going to the bar, stopped answering messages, stopped accepting orders that required more than the mechanical work of his hands. He'd wake up, go to the workshop, work until his muscles screamed, and then climb up to the empty apartment where he slept a dreamless sleep, aided by bourbon. It was a type of existence, basic functioning disguised as life. It was on one of those January afternoons, when rain beat against the workshop windows like impatient fingers, that he heard the knock on the door. Soft, but insistent. Robert considered ignoring it. He wasn't expecting anyone, didn't want to see anyone. But the knock came again, and something, maybe curiosity, maybe simple ingrained politeness, made him put down his sandpaper and open the door. On the other side stood a woman he vaguely recognized from the neighborhood, Donna Mai, as everyone called her, though he never knew if that was actually her name or just a title of respect. She must have been in her early 70s, maybe older, with dark skin that seemed to have been polished by time until it shone, and eyes that carried the weight of wisdom earned through decades of lived life. She wore a quilted purple coat against the rain and held a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Robert," she said, and her voice carried the soft accent of the American South. "Can I come in? I'm getting soaked out here." Sure. Sorry." He opened the door wider, making room for her to pass. Donna Mai entered with the familiarity of someone who never doubted their welcome. Her eyes swept over the workshop, the organized tools, the sawdust on the floor, the half-finished project on the workbench, and she nodded as if approving. "You have talented hands," she said, placing the basket on a clean table. "I saw that table you made for the Morrison family. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful." "Thank you," Robert murmured, not quite knowing what to do with his hands. He shoved them in his jeans pockets. "I brought soup," she said, pulling back the cloth to reveal a glass container still steaming. "Chicken with vegetables, my mother's recipe, and bread I baked this morning." "Donna Mai, you didn't have to—" "Of course I didn't have to," she interrupted, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made him quiet. "But I wanted to. Now, are you going to sit down and eat while it's hot? Or are you going to keep pretending you're fine when we both know you're not?" The frankness disarmed him. Robert felt something shift in his chest, something that had been stuck for months. I don't know if I have clean dishes upstairs. Then we eat here." She was already looking around, finding 2 clean glasses he used for water while working. "Do you have spoons?" 15 minutes later, they were sitting on wooden stools Robert had made, eating soup straight from the container with mismatched spoons. The rain continued its song against the roof. The smell of garlic and thyme filled the air, mixing with the familiar fragrance of wood. Donna Mai didn't speak while they ate, just ate with silent appreciation, occasionally breaking off bread and passing him a piece. There was something deeply comforting about her presence, not intrusive, just solid. like an ancient tree that existed long before you and would continue long after. When they finished, she put her spoon aside and looked at him directly. "You're hiding," she said. It wasn't a question. Robert looked at his hands. "I'm working. Work and life aren't the same thing, son. You're breathing, but you're not living. There's a difference." He didn't respond. What could he say? "Can I ask you a question?" Donna Mae didn't wait for permission. "What do you think is keeping you from being happy?" He stopped, searching for the right words. "My body. My anatomy. I'm too much. I hurt people I want to touch. I drive away people I want to keep close." Donna Mae nodded slowly, as if considering something deeply. "Have you ever heard of bonsai?" The change of subject confused him. "The small trees?" "Yes. You take a tree that would naturally grow 20, 30 meters tall, and you keep it small through careful pruning, wire manipulation. Some say it's art. Others say it's cruelty." She paused. "What do you think?" "I don't know. I've never thought about it. The tree isn't broken, Robert. It's not sick. It's just being forced to be something it's not naturally. And when you stop forcing it, when you plant it in the right soil, with the right space, it grows exactly as it should." Her eyes held his. "You're not broken, son. You just haven't found the right soil yet." Robert's throat tightened. "But I've hurt people. You tried to fit into spaces that weren't made for you. That's not your fault. It's not their fault. It's just incompatibility." She reached out, placing a wrinkled but warm hand over his. "But somewhere out there is someone for whom you're not too much. Someone for whom you're exactly right." "How can you know that?" "Because I've lived 83 years on this planet, and one thing I've learned is that nature doesn't make mistakes. Everything has its place, its purpose, its counterpart. You just haven't found yours yet." Robert felt something wet on his cheek and realized, surprised, that he was crying. Not sobbing, just silent tears streaming down as years of shame and loneliness finally found an outlet. Donna Mae said nothing, just held his hand and let him cry. When he finally composed himself, she stood up, gathering the empty containers. "You're not your body, Robert," she said softly. "You're your heart, your talent, your kindness, your ability to create beauty from nothing." She gestured to the workshop around them. "All of this is who you are. The rest is just packaging." "But the packaging matters," he said, and his voice was raw. "Of course it matters, but it doesn't define, doesn't limit, doesn't condemn." She held his face between her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Find your strength within, and the body will shape itself to the soul. Do you understand?" He wasn't sure he understood, but he nodded anyway. "Good." She smiled, a smile that lit up her entire face, turning the wrinkles into maps of lived joy. "Now you're going to promise old May something." "What?" "You're going to stop hiding. You're going to go out into this world again. You're going to remember that you deserve love, real, complete, unconditional." Her eyes pierced his. "Promise?" The word stuck in his throat. Making that promise felt impossible, like committing to fly. But there was something about Donna Mae, in her unshakable certainty, in her fierce kindness, that made him want to believe. "I promise," he whispered. "Good boy." She kissed his forehead, a maternal gesture that made him think of his own mother, dead 5 years now. "Now I'm leaving the rest of the soup. You eat, you rest, and tomorrow you start again, okay?" "Okay." She went to the door, then stopped and looked back. "Robert, one last thing." "Yes? The person you're waiting for? She's waiting for you too. Don't make her wait too long." And then she was gone, leaving only the smell of soup, the warmth of her presence, and a tiny seed of hope that Robert didn't know could still grow. That night, for the first time in months, he didn't drink bourbon until he passed out. Instead, he sat by the window watching the rain and thought about trees, how they grow, how they adapt, how they find their way toward the light even when planted in shadow. Donna Mae's words echoed, "You're not your body, you're your heart." And for the first time in as long as he could remember, Robert began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was right. Spring arrived in Portland like a whispered promise, cherry blossoms exploding in pink clouds along the streets, the air finally losing its winter bite, days stretching lazily into evening. Robert had started going out again, slowly, like someone testing thin ice. Morning walks in the park, coffee at Stumptown without looking over his shoulder, small steps back into the world. It was a Saturday in April when everything changed. He was at the neighborhood farmer's market, not selling, just walking, watching, letting the movement and sound of life happen around him. The smell of freshly roasted coffee mixed with the scent of fresh flowers and baked bread. Children ran between stalls, laughter echoing. Street musicians played guitar on corners, their instrument cases open for coins. Robert stopped at a used bookstall, flipping through a worn copy of Steinbeck, when he felt, more than heard, a change in the air. That strange, inexplicable feeling when you know you're being watched. He turned, and there across the street, standing in front of a flower stall, was Chloe. The world tilted on its axis. She was in profile to him, examining a bouquet of peonies, and for a moment Robert thought he was imagining it. That loneliness and longing had finally conspired to create mirages. But then she turned her head, just slightly, just enough for the sun to catch in her hair, and he knew. Chloe. She had changed. Of course she had. 16 years had passed since that afternoon under the tree. But the changes hadn't diminished her. Instead, they'd refined something that had always been there. She was even taller, if that was possible. Or maybe she just carried her height differently now. No hunching, no apologies. She wore a green dress that flowed to just below her knees and a denim jacket thrown over her shoulders. Her honey brown hair was longer, falling in loose waves down her back. But it was her eyes. Even at a distance, he recognized those green eyes that had seen him when no one else did. Robert's heart hammered against his ribs like a bird trying to escape. His hands started to sweat. Should he go to her? Should he just stand there? What if she didn't remember him? What if she remembered but didn't care? Before he could decide, she turned completely, and her eyes met his across the crowd. Recognition was instant. He saw it in the widening of her eyes, in the way her mouth opened slightly, in the way she dropped the bouquet she was holding. For a moment suspended in amber, neither of them moved. The world kept spinning around them, but they were fixed points, anchored by shared history and years of silence. Then Chloe smiled. It wasn't the shy smile of the girl he remembered. It was something fuller, more confident, but still unmistakably hers. And she started walking. Long strides, steady gaze, crossing the street toward him as if the 16 years between them were just days. Robert couldn't move. He was rooted in place, holding a book he'd completely forgotten about, watching her approach like it was a dream he might wake from at any moment. She stopped 3 feet away, and up close she was even more beautiful than he remembered, not in the polished magazine way, but in the real way of someone who had lived, suffered, grown. There were fine lines around her eyes that spoke of much laughter. There was a strength in her jaw that hadn't been there at 16. There was a fullness to her presence that made the air around her seem denser, more alive. "Robert," she said, and hearing his name in her voice after so long was like hearing music he didn't know he'd forgotten. "Chloe." His own voice came out hoarse, uneven. You're here." "I am." She laughed, a small, disbelieving sound. "God, you look old," he offered, trying for humor to cover the fact that he was shaking. "Grown," she corrected, and there was something in her eyes as she looked him over that made heat rise in his skin. "You look wonderful, Robert." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said the first thing that came to mind, "You too, you always have been." Something lit up in her face. Pleasure, memory, something deeper he couldn't name. "Can I hug you?" she asked, and there was a vulnerability in that question that broke something in him. "Please." She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, and God, she fit perfectly. Still, after all these years, after all the growth and change, she still fit against him like they were 2 pieces of the same puzzle. Her head rested on his shoulder. Her perfume, something floral but with a woody note, filled his senses. He could feel her warmth through his shirt, the steady rhythm of her breathing. They stayed like that for too long to be casual, but neither pulled away. Around them, the market continued, people passing, conversations flowing. But they were an island of quiet in the middle of chaos. When they finally separated, Chloe kept her hands on his arms as if needing to maintain physical contact. "What are you doing here?" Robert asked. "I thought, Seattle. I moved back 3 weeks ago." Her thumbs moved unconsciously against his biceps, small circles he felt through the fabric. "I got a job as an architect at a firm here, and I wanted to come home." "Portland is home?" Her eyes met his. "It always was, even when it wasn't." There was so much weight in those words, so much left unsaid. "Coffee," he heard himself say. "I know a place, unless you're busy." "I'm not busy." She said it so quickly that they both laughed, a nervous, relieved laugh. Coffee would be perfect. They walked side by side through the Pearl District streets, and it was surreal and perfectly natural at the same time. Their arms brushed occasionally, sending small sparks of awareness through him. She pointed out changes in the neighborhood, new buildings, shops that had replaced old ones, and he filled in the gaps, telling stories about the community that had developed while she was gone. "Do you still make furniture?" she asked as they turned a corner. "Yeah, I have a workshop on Glisan. Can I see it?" He hesitated. The workshop was his private space, his sanctuary. But this was Chloe, and he found he wanted her to see, wanted her to understand who he'd become. "Sure, it's on the way, actually." 15 minutes later, they were at the workshop. Robert opened the door, and the familiarity of the space, the smell of sawdust and varnish, the light filtering through high windows, the precisely organized tools, calmed his nerves. Chloe entered slowly, her eyes taking everything in. She ran her fingers along a table he was finishing, feeling the grain of the wood, the smoothness of the surface. There was reverence in her touch that made his chest tighten. "Robert," she whispered, "this is incredible. You're incredible. It's just wood." She turned to him, and there was an intensity in her face that made him forget to breathe. "It's not just wood. It's art. It's you transforming something raw into something beautiful." She took a step closer. "You always had this gift. Even when we were kids, that fort we built, you saw possibilities where no one else did. You helped. You led. Another step." They were so close now that he could see the golden flecks in her green eyes, count every freckle on her cheeks. "You always led, Robert. I just followed." His breathing was uneven. So was hers. The air between them was thick, charged with years of absence and the sudden, overwhelming proximity. "I missed you," he said, and the words came out before he could stop them. "Every day. Every damn day." Her eyes filled with tears. "Me too. I tried not to. Tried to move on, build a life. But there was always this part of me that stayed here, with you, under that tree." There was so much silence between them. But now every gesture spoke of contained desire. "Chloe, kiss me," she whispered. "Please. I've waited 16 years. Don't make me wait any longer." And he kissed her. It was like coming home and discovering a new country at the same time. Her lips were soft, warm, moving against his with a need that matched his own. Her hands rose to his hair, and he wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her against him. She gasped against his mouth, and the sound went straight to his blood. He deepened the kiss, and she responded with equal fervor, her fingers clutching his shirt as if he might disappear if she let go. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, foreheads pressed together, hearts beating out of sync. "That was," she began. 16 years overdue," he finished. She laughed, a rich, happy sound, and kissed him again, briefer this time but no less intense. "Have dinner with me," she said against his lips. "Tonight, tomorrow night, every night." "Yes," he replied without hesitation. "Yes to everything." And there, in the afternoon light filtering through his workshop, surrounded by the smell of wood and the warmth of her, Robert felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The following days unfolded like a feverish dream, intense, consuming, impossible to ignore. Robert and Chloe fell into a rhythm that was both new and old, like a dance they'd rehearsed years ago but never had the chance to perform. They saw each other every day, sometimes in the morning, for coffee before work, sometimes at lunch, meeting at a favorite food truck or sitting on a park bench. Always in the evening, long dinners where food grew cold on plates while they talked, aimless walks through Portland's lit streets, hours spent simply existing in the same space. But there was something growing between them, something hot and insistent that pulsed beneath every conversation, every laugh, every casual touch that wasn't casual at all. It was Thursday night, and they were at Chloe's apartment for the first time. She'd moved into a loft in the industrial district, open spaces with exposed beams and huge windows overlooking the city. Boxes still waited to be unpacked in corners, but she'd managed to set up the essentials. A comfortable couch, a small dining table, plants in the windows catching the afternoon light. "Sorry about the mess," she said, bringing 2 glasses of red wine from the kitchen. "I'm still figuring out where everything goes." "It's perfect," Robert said, and he wasn't talking about the apartment. Chloe wore black leggings and an oversized t-shirt that slipped off one shoulder, revealing the curve of her collarbone. Her hair was pulled up in a messy bun, loose strands framing her face, no makeup, barefoot, completely relaxed, and she took his breath away. They sat on the couch, legs folded beneath them, turning toward each other. Conversation flowed naturally, talking about work, about plans for the weekend, about an art exhibition she wanted to see. But beneath the words, another conversation was happening, in looks that lingered a second too long, in smiles that carried promises, in the way their knees touched and neither pulled away. "You have sawdust in your hair," Chloe said suddenly, laughing. "What, really?" "Here." She reached out, her fingers sliding through his hair behind his ear, removing the small wood fragment. But after she removed it, her hand remained, fingers slowly tracing from temple to jaw. Her fingers trembled as they touched his face. Chloe's skin was warm. Her touch was fire. Robert froze, every nerve in his body hyper-aware of the contact. His eyes met hers, and what he saw there made his heart skip. Desire, yes, but also tenderness, curiosity, a kind of wonder. "Chloe," he said, and his voice came out hoarse. "You're shaking," she whispered. "You're touching me. Is that bad?" "It's anything but bad." She smiled, a slow, knowing smile he'd never seen before. Her thumb traced his lower lip, and he saw her eyes darken when his breathing quickened. "I want to kiss you," she said, "all the time. It's driving me crazy." "Then kiss me." She did. Slowly this time, savoring. Her lips moved against his with a deliberation that was somehow more intense than urgency. She tasted of wine and possibility. Her hands shaped his face, holding him like he was precious, fragile. When they separated, she didn't go far. Their breaths mingled, their noses touched. "You know what's crazy?" she whispered. "What?" "I used to dream about this. When we were teenagers. Kissing you." Her fingers traced his jaw. "I thought it was just a girl's fantasy. But later, when I grew up, when I had other relationships, none of them felt right. And I wondered if it was because I was comparing them all to you." His heart was pounding. "Chloe, let me finish." Her eyes searched his. "I came back to Portland for work. That's true, but I also came back because I couldn't stop thinking about you, about us, about what could have been if I'd been brave enough to stay. You were 16. You didn't have a choice. I did. I asked you to give me a reason to fight, and you didn't. The truth of that hurt. I know I was young and stupid and scared. Me too." She smiled sadly. "But we're not young anymore. And I'm not scared anymore." She kissed him again, and this time there was urgency. Her hands slid from his face to his neck to his shoulders, exploring with a curiosity that made his blood boil. He pulled her closer, his hands on her waist, feeling her warmth through the thin fabric of her shirt. She shifted, swinging a leg over him so she was sitting in his lap, facing him. The position pressed them together in ways that made them both gasp. Her eyes widened, and he saw the exact moment she felt it, felt how much he wanted her, the physical evidence pressing between them. He froze, familiar terror rising in his throat. This was when everything always fell apart, when the reality of his body met desire, and desire died under the weight of impossibility. But Chloe didn't pull away. Instead, she held his face between her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Hey," she said softly. "Where did you go?" Chloe, I need to tell you something." "Okay." She didn't move from his lap. "You can tell me anything." He took a deep breath, trying to find the words. How to explain without sounding like a monster. How to warn without scaring her. My anatomy is not typical. I'm larger than most men. Significantly larger. And it's caused problems. Pain. 4 past partners. He watched her face, expecting to see fear or pity or disgust, but what he saw was thought, consideration. "Larger how?" she asked directly. He blinked, not expecting that response. In all aspects. Length and girth. How much larger are we talking?" "Chloe, Robert, I'm an architect. I work with measurements. Specificity helps me." There was a pragmatism in her voice that was somehow comforting. "Besides, I'm 6'2". I understand about being too much physically." He gave the numbers. Numbers he'd memorized from embarrassed doctors and shocked partners. He saw her eyes widen slightly, but not with fear. With curiosity. "Okay," she said slowly. That's significantly above average. I hurt people, Chloe. I don't mean to, but I do." She was quiet for a moment, her fingers playing with the hair at the nape of his neck. An absent, comforting gesture. "Have you ever been with someone my height?" she asked finally. "No, not until you." "So maybe," she said slowly, "the problem wasn't that you were too much, it was that they were too small." The simplicity of that statement stunned him. Not that they were too small, which would make them victims, but that the fit simply wasn't compatible. No blame, no fault, just incompatibility. "Donna Mae said something similar," he murmured. "Donna Mae is wise." Chloe leaned in and kissed his forehead, then his nose, then his lips. Soft, reassuring touches. "Look, I'm not going to pretend I know how this will work, but I'm also not going to run without trying. If you want to try. If you want me." "If I want you?" He almost laughed at the absurdity. "Chloe, I've wanted you since I was 10 years old and didn't know what wanting meant. I want you so much it hurts." She smiled. That slow smile that made his stomach flip. "Then slowly," she said. "We go slowly, and we communicate, and we figure it out together." She pressed her forehead to his. "I trust you, Robert. I always have." They stayed like that, forehead to forehead, breaths intertwined, until the tension slowly left his shoulders. "Stay tonight," she whispered. Not yet. Just stay. I want to sleep in your arms. I want to wake up and see you. Can we do that?" "Yes," he said, and it was the easiest word he'd ever said. "Yes, we can do that." Later, lying in her bed in the darkness, him in boxers, her in a t-shirt and shorts, Robert held Chloe against his chest and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Her hair smelled like coconut, and she had one arm thrown over his chest, leg intertwined with his. She fit perfectly. "Robert," she murmured sleepily. "Yeah? I'm glad you came back to me." He kissed the top of her head. "I never left." And as she drifted into sleep, breathing, deepening and calming, Robert stared at the ceiling and thought about trees finding the right soil, about puzzles finding missing pieces, about hope he'd thought was dead sprouting green and new. Her eyes, even more so. 3 weeks had passed since that first night at Chloe's apartment. 3 weeks of slow and deliberate discovery. Hands learning curves, lips memorizing skin, bodies getting to know each other through layers of clothing that gradually became thinner, more revealing. They had gone slowly, painfully, wonderfully slowly. Kisses that deepened until they were both breathless. Touches that explored over clothing, then underclothing, mapping territory with reverence and growing confidence. Chloe had guided his hands to her breasts, gasping when he shaped them through her bra, moaning softly when skin finally met skin. He had trembled when she slid her hand down his stomach, lower, tracing the evidence of his desire through his jeans. Her eyes widened when she actually felt him, the size, the weight of him, but not with fear, with fascination, with determination. "God, Robert," she'd whispered that night, her hand still on him. Really impressive. Scary? He'd asked, barely able to form words. Challenging, she corrected, and there was a gleam in her eyes that was part playful, part absolutely serious. But I've never run from challenges. Now it was a May evening, the air warm and heavy with the scent of wildflowers and freshly cut grass. Chloe had suggested they visit her old house. The family living there now had recently moved out, and the property was empty, waiting for new occupants. She'd kept in touch with the owners over the years, and they'd given her permission to visit one last time. The old tree was still there. It stood in the backyard, exactly as Robert remembered, thick branches extending like welcoming arms, leaves whispering secrets to the night wind. The full moon hung low in the sky, casting everything in silver and shadow. "Wow," Chloe breathed, her hand finding his. "It's exactly how I remembered." "Bigger," Robert said. "Or maybe we were smaller." They walked to the tree and Chloe ran her hand over the rough bark, a gesture of greeting, of recognition. Robert did the same, and memories flooded. All those summers, all those shared secrets, all those unlived possibilities. "It was here," Chloe said softly, "that I realized I loved you. I was 15 and you were teaching me about different types of wood, like you always did, adorable nerd that you were. And the sun was setting, and the light was on your face in this specific way, and I thought, oh, I love this boy." Robert's heart tightened. "You never told me." "I was scared." She turned to look at him. "Scared you didn't feel the same. Scared of ruining our friendship. Scared of everything." Her fingers traced his jaw. "But I'm not scared anymore." "What are you scared of?" "Losing you again, wasting more time." Her eyes searched his in the moonlight. "I want you, Robert, completely, tonight, here." His heart stopped, then beat violently. "Chloe, we don't have to rush. We're not rushing. We're ready." She took a step closer, their bodies almost touching. "I'm ready. Are you ready?" He was terrified. He was hopeful. He was more aroused than he'd ever been in his life. "Yes," he whispered. "God, yes." She smiled, that smile that always made his world make sense, and kissed him. Soft at first, then deeper, more demanding. Her hands slid under his shirt, exploring the muscles of his back, scratching lightly with her nails in a way that made him moan against her mouth. He held her waist, pulling her against him, and she gasped, feeling the full extent of his desire pressing between them. But instead of pulling back, she pressed closer, moving her hips in a way that sent flames through his veins. "Chloe," he groaned, his forehead against hers, trying to maintain some control. "I brought a blanket," she whispered, "in my bag, and other things. Lubricant. Protection. I prepared, Robert. The practicality of it, her careful preparation, her consideration, almost undid him. She spread the blanket under the tree in that same spot where they'd sat so many times as children. But nothing about this moment was childish. The air was thick with anticipation, with desire, with years of longing finally finding resolution. Chloe removed her jacket first, then pulled her shirt over her head, revealing a lace bra that made his mouth go dry. She was all long lines and soft curves, pale skin that glowed in the moonlight. Her eyes never left his as she unbuttoned her jeans, pushing them down her hips along with her underwear. She stood naked before him. No shame, no hesitation. And she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Your turn," she said, her voice husky. With hands that trembled only slightly, Robert removed his shirt. He saw her eyes roam over his chest, his stomach, with obvious appreciation. When he reached for his belt, she stepped forward. "Let me," she whispered. She unbuttoned his jeans with steady fingers, pushing them down along with his boxers. And for the first time she saw him completely, all of him, and he watched her face, searching for fear, for doubt. What he saw was wonder and determination. "Come here," she said, lying down on the blanket, extending her arms to him. He went, covering her body with his, and the feeling of skin against skin along their entire length was so intense that they both groaned. She was soft where he was hard, curved where he was angular. Her legs wrapped around his waist, and he could feel the wet heat of her against him, so close, so tempting. "Slowly," she whispered, her hands framing his face. We communicate, right? Right. She reached between them, grabbing the lubricant she'd left nearby. "Let me prepare you," she said, and there was something so intimate about this act, her covering him generously, her fingers wrapping around him, learning his weight and shape. He ran his fingers down her neck, slowly down to her waist, memorizing every inch. He explored lower, finding her warm and already wet for him. She moaned when he circled her most sensitive spot, arching against his hand. "Robert," she breathed, "I need you. Now." He positioned himself, the tip of him pressing against her, and stopped. This was the moment that always ended in pain, in disappointment, in failure. But Chloe held his face, making him look at her. "I trust you," she said. "Now trust me." And slowly, so slowly, he began to enter. Just the tip at first, and he felt her breath catch, felt her tension. "Too much?" he asked, already starting to pull away. "No, just slow. Let me adjust." He waited, trembling with the effort of holding back until she nodded. Another inch, then another. His eyes never left hers, reading every expression, looking for pain. There was strain there. She was stretched, definitely, her muscles accommodating his size, but there was no pain. Her eyes were wide, but with wonder, not fear. "God," she gasped. You're... Stop," he asked, terrified. "Don't stop. Don't you dare stop." He moved deeper, inch by inch, until finally, miraculously, he was completely inside her, completely surrounded by her warmth, her tightness, her acceptance. Their breaths were ragged, the kisses were intense, wet, hungry. She moaned softly when he pressed his lips to her neck, skin against skin, careful touches, absolute surrender. He entered her with care and reverence, like someone honoring a miracle. Chloe wrapped her legs around Robert, eyes closed, mouth parted, body saying yes in every movement. "You fit," she whispered in wonder. "Perfectly. You fit in me perfectly." And he did fit. For the first time in his life, his body found a body that could receive him completely, without pain, without limit. She was deep enough, wide enough, strong enough to take all of him. They began moving together, slowly at first, finding their rhythm, learning what made the other tremble. He supported himself on his elbows, watching her face as he moved in her, memorizing every expression of pleasure that crossed her features. "Faster," she asked, her nails scratching his back. "I can take it. I promise." He sped up, went deeper, and she cried out in pleasure, not pain, but pure ecstasy. Their bodies found a rhythm that was primitive and perfect, ancient and new. "Robert," she moaned, her head thrown back, exposing the long line of her neck. "Don't stop. Please don't stop." "Never," he swore against her skin. "I'll never stop." He felt when she started to tighten around him, her muscles pulsing, her breathing becoming irregular. She was close. He could feel it, could see it. "Come with me," she whispered. "I want to feel you." And when she broke, when she screamed his name to the night sky, her body convulsing around him, he followed. Waves of pleasure so intense, he saw stars spilling into her as she held him tight, receiving everything he had to give. There, under the tree, there was no more pain. There was pleasure, acceptance, union. Afterglow. They collapsed together, sweat cooling on their skin, hearts gradually returning to normal. Robert rolled to the side, pulling her into his arms, and she came willingly, nestling against his chest. Covered only by moonlight and the warmth of their bodies, they lay there. She ran her hand over his chest, tracing invisible lines through sweat and muscle. He kissed her forehead, murmuring, "You're everything." And Chloe replied, "You're finally free." They stayed like that for a long time, listening to the night sounds around them. Crickets singing, leaves whispering, the world continuing to spin while theirs had been completely transformed. "I love you," Robert said finally, the words he should have said 16 years ago finally finding voice. "I always have, since we were kids. I just didn't know how to say it." Chloe lifted her head, her eyes meeting his in the moonlight. "I love you too," she whispered. "I came home for you, Robert. For us. For this." She leaned in and kissed him, soft, sweet, promising. "And I'm never leaving again. Promise?" "Promise." And under the old tree that had witnessed their childhood, that had kept their secrets, that had patiently waited for this moment, Robert believed her. Finally, after years of loneliness and shame and pain, he had found where he belonged, in her arms, in her body, in her love. And it was perfect. 6 months later, Robert woke to the sound of rain tapping gently against the window. Not the cold, relentless rain of Portland winter, but the gentle drizzle of autumn that turned the city into shades of amber and bronze. He rolled over in bed, reaching for Chloe, but the space beside him was empty, the sheets still warm from where she'd been. He found her in the kitchen of their apartment now, since she'd officially moved into the space above the workshop 2 months ago. She was on her tiptoes, reaching for a mug in the upper cabinet, wearing only one of his oversized t-shirts that barely covered her thighs. "Good morning," he said, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind, burying his face in her neck. She leaned back against him, letting out a contented sigh. "Good morning, love." Love. He'd never get tired of hearing her call him that. "Coffee?" she offered, turning in his arms. "You," he replied, kissing her deeply. When they finally broke apart, they were both smiling. Those goofy, lovesick smiles that would have embarrassed their younger selves, but that they now wore without reservation. Life had transformed into something unrecognizable over the past months. The apartment that had once been his sanctuary of solitude was now full of life. Chloe's plants in the windows, her architecture books stacked next to his woodworking magazines, their clothes mixed together in the closet. There were new sounds, her laughter echoing off the walls, music she played while cooking, the sound of 2 sets of footsteps instead of 1. And the neighborhood had changed too. Or maybe Robert had changed, and the neighborhood was simply reflecting that back. The first weeks after that night under the tree had been tentative. He still expected the looks, the whispers, the judgment. But Chloe walked beside him with her head held high, fingers intertwined with his. And something about her confidence, her complete lack of shame, began to change the narrative. Donna Mae was the first to notice. She saw them together at the neighborhood market, and her whole face lit up. "There she is," Donna Mae said, pulling Chloe into a hug before they'd even been formally introduced. "The person you were waiting for." Chloe looked at Robert, confused but smiling. "Donna Mae said you were waiting for me," Robert explained. "Months before you came back." "I knew," Donna Mae said with that certainty that only comes with age and wisdom. "Always knew. You two fit." And they did fit. In every way. Physically, yes. Their bodies found pleasure in each other night after night, learning and relearning, never growing tired. But also emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. Chloe understood his love for wood, for creating. Robert understood her passion for design, for transforming spaces. They inspired each other, challenged each other, supported each other. And slowly, the neighborhood began to see what Donna Mae had seen from the start. Mike, his old friend who'd pulled away, showed up at the workshop one afternoon with a sheepish expression. "Man," he said, hands in his pockets, looking at his feet. "I was an idiot, a complete idiot, and I'm sorry." Robert had considered making him suffer, but Chloe, who was working on drawings at his desk, gave him that look. The look that said, "Forgive, move forward, choose kindness." "It's okay," Robert said, and he meant it. "Want a beer?" They rebuilt the friendship slowly, brick by brick, and Mike brought James, who brought others, until the group was back. Changed, older, but still there. The women who'd once looked at him with pity or fear now saw him differently. Because beside him stood Chloe, confident, happy, obviously, and completely loved. And if she wasn't afraid of him, if she chose him every day, then maybe the story they'd told about him was wrong. Jessica, his first, stopped him on the street one day. She was with a guy, fingers intertwined, but she stopped when she saw him. "Robert," she said, and there was something in her voice. Regret, maybe. "I heard you're engaged. Congratulations." "Thank you," he replied genuinely. I'm sorry for how things ended, for how I talked about you." He almost said it was fine, but Chloe squeezed his hand, a reminder to be honest. "It hurt," he said, "but I understand. It wasn't anyone's fault, just not compatible." She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. I hope she knows how lucky she is." "I do," Chloe said softly, stepping forward. "And he knows he's lucky too." And he did. God, how he did. It was a Saturday afternoon in September when Robert took Chloe back to that tree. The yard now had new occupants, a young family with 2 children playing on a swing set that hadn't been there before. But the tree remained, constant and unchanging. "Remember this place?" he asked, though it was obviously a rhetorical question. "How could I forget?" She smiled, lacing her fingers with his. "It changed my whole life." "Mine too." He turned to her, and his heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "Chloe, we stood under this tree when we were 10 and built forts. We stood here when we were 16 and said goodbye without saying the words that mattered. And we stood here 6 months ago and finally found each other for real." He knelt down, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. He saw her eyes widen, tears already forming. "I want to stand here again," he continued, his voice trembling with emotion, "and ask you to marry me, to build a life with me. Forever." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold ring with a single emerald, the exact color of her eyes. "Robert," she whispered, tears flowing freely now, "I've loved you since I didn't know what love was. I lost you and spent 16 years feeling incomplete. And when you came back, you didn't just accept me, you celebrated me. You made me feel like I wasn't too much, but exactly right." His own voice broke. "Marry me, Chloe. Let me spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice." "Yes," she said, dropping to her knees in front of him, framing his face with her hands. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger and then pulled her into a kiss that tasted of salt and joy and promise. Around them, the world continued. Children playing, birds singing, wind moving through leaves, but they were the center of everything. The wedding. They married 3 months later, in December, under fairy lights and snow-covered branches. The ceremony was small, just close friends and family. Held, of course, in the yard with the tree. The owners had given permission enthusiastically, moved by the love story that had begun there so many years ago. Chloe wore a simple, elegant dress that flowed to the floor, her hair loose in waves. She looked like a queen, tall, confident, absolutely radiant. Robert wore a suit Chloe had helped him choose, but all he could see was her. Walking toward him, choosing him, saying yes to their future. Donna May officiated the ceremony because, as she said, "I brought you 2 this far, I can finish the job." "Robert and Chloe," she said, her voice carrying in the cold, clear air, "are proof that love isn't about perfection. It's about fit. It's about finding someone whose edges align with yours, whose depths match your heights, whose soul recognizes yours." She looked at them both with those wise, ancient eyes. "The world tried to tell you that you were too much," she said to Robert. "And tell you that you were too much," she said to Chloe. "But the truth is that you were just enough for each other, and that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." When they exchanged vows, there wasn't a dry eye. When they kissed as husband and wife, applause echoed through the neighborhood. And when they danced their first dance, right there, on the grass, under the fairy lights, with music playing from a small speaker, the whole world seemed to be celebrating with them. A year later, Chloe was pregnant. 2 years later, they had a daughter, a beautiful girl with Chloe's green eyes and Robert's gentle smile. 3 years later, a son. They built a house, Robert designing and creating every piece of furniture, Chloe designing the space to maximize light and warmth and love. It was made of wood and glass and realized dreams. The neighborhood, which had once judged them, now celebrated them. Their story became legend, but this time, the right kind. Not about curse or impossibility, but about love finding a way. About 2 bodies considered too much fitting perfectly. About hope when everything seemed lost. Young couples came to them asking for advice. People who felt different, who felt too much or too little, found hope in their story. And every spring on the anniversary of that first night under the tree, Robert and Chloe returned. They sat in the branches as they'd done as children, legs swinging, hands intertwined, and remembered. They remembered the pain, the isolation, the feeling of never belonging. And then they looked at the life they'd built, at the children playing in the yard, at the house full of laughter, at the love that surrounded them like air. And they knew. The giantess and the man of exaggerated masculinity proved that real love doesn't measure. It just feels. And under that old tree, which had witnessed everything, all the pain, all the joy, all the transformation, they kissed as they'd done 1,000 times before, and as they would 1,000 times more, because some loves are written in the stars. But theirs was carved in wood, built with hands and hearts, and rooted so deeply that nothing, ever, could uproot it. In the end, Robert discovered it was never about being too much. It was about finding someone for whom he was exactly right. Two bodies the world judged inadequate proved that compatibility isn't measured in inches or social expectations. It's measured in hearts that recognize each other, in souls that fit together. Under that old tree, where childhood dreams once grew, an adult love blossomed and redefined what it means to belong completely to someone. Sometimes, the hardest journey isn't changing who we are, but finding who sees us exactly as we should be seen. And you? Have you ever felt too much or too little for this world? Have you ever believed you'd never find someone who would embrace you completely, with all your quirks, all your excesses, all your truth? Because deep down, this story isn't just about Robert and Chloe. It's about all of us searching for our place, our perfect fit, our tree under which we can finally breathe. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave your like and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the super thanks button. Comment where you're listening from. I love knowing these words are reaching hearts around the world. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing stories that truly move people.